Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 344, I chat with journalists Chris Boylan, Caleb Denison, and Robert Heron about our hands-on experience with the LG W7 OLED TV. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded March 9th, 2017. Episode 344, LG OLED TV Review. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by Grasshopper. Stay connected and run your business from your mobile phone with Grasshopper. To save $50 on your order, visit trygrasshopper.com/twit. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week, I have a full plate of guests. Let's start with Caleb Denison, senior editor at Digital Trends. Hey, Caleb, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Always happy for you to be here. In fact, this is your first time, and I hope not the last.
No, I look forward to future encounters.
Excellent, excellent. Chris Boylan, editor of BigPictureBigSound.com, and a returning guest. Hey, Chris, welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And nice to have you here. And finally, Robert Heron, technologist at HeronFidelity.com, and a regular guest on the show. Robert, so glad to have you here.
Thank you, Scott. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure for me, too. Those who are tuned in live at live.twit.tv can join the chat room there, or at irc.twit.tv. And you can post questions for me and our guests as we go, and I'll pass along as many as I can. It helps if you put my screen name in your message, Scott Wilkinson, no dots or dashes or spaces or anything like that, because then it shows up in a different color on my screen. So, the four of us, along with some others, were invited to San Francisco by LG to take a deep dive into the 2017 OLED TVs. And I invited these guys, who were all there with me on the same day, to come on the show and talk about what we learned. Plus, LG gave us several hours with the TV, with one of their 2017 models, the W7, the flagship, which has some super cool aspects to it that we're going to talk about. But it was a long day. I don't know about you guys, but my dogs were barking. I was ready for sleep at the end of that day.
Yeah, I heard you actually went back to the room, Scott, after dinner, right? Because you had to do a little more testing, a little more calibration?
Well, calibration was done, but I wanted to do a couple other tests. So, yeah, I did go back after dinner. And Robert, you didn't join us for dinner. You're the only one local to San Francisco, so that must have been really nice for you.
It was nice to at least wait till traffic died down to get out of San Francisco. So, yeah, but I did miss a fine dinner, and I just wasn't feeling very well. So, getting over
that's true.
Wicked chest infection, just killing me. But that was a long day of not only just presentation and overview about the product lineup for this year, but also a lot of technical information and demonstrations, in addition to as much time as we really had left to spend actually with hands-on testing of the W panel, the new wallpaper design from LG. And I think collectively, I didn't hear that many complaints. So at least on the picture quality side of things. So it should turn out to be one of the very best TVs this year.
Yeah, I agree. Caleb, you flew in from north of San Francisco, and I'm sure you found it to be pretty long and grueling, but interesting.
It was a long day. I don't want to say it was grueling, though. I mean, I enjoyed spending time with you guys in the room, asking questions, kind of working off of each other. yeah, I mean, it was definitely a long day. And by the time we were done testing the televisions, I was definitely ready for some food. And in an uncharacteristic move on my part, I ended up cashing out right after dinner, hit the hotel. I had an early flight the next day. And got to work right away writing the review. Funny story, I left my laptop with the review stored locally, not in the cloud. I left it on the plane.
Oh, no!
Yeah. So, and the worst part about it is this is not my first time leaving a laptop on a plane.
Man.
So I actually have some experience. I managed to get a hold of Virgin America. The plane returned to San Francisco. I managed to get them to pull it off the plane before it headed off to Boston Logan, and they overnighted it to me. So I didn't have to do without it that long, but it took a good 14 hours before I was in the office, opening my backpack, ready to finish up the review, and realized I had, 1,200 words that could possibly just be gone, and I had to wait around to get the laptop back. But I was thankful after that long ordeal to get the laptop back and of course wrap up the review. It was a pretty impressive television, and I enjoyed the whole process.
Yeah. So Caleb, those springy things that the old people at casinos have so that they don't lose their player's card in the slot machine? You should put one of those on your laptop.
One of those for the laptop.
Springy.
Yeah.
Oops, walking away without my laptop. Better get it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I almost left a passport once on a plane with my headphones. I'm just bad. I get done with the flight and I'm so excited and eager to get out of there that I forget to do all the checks, and I'm going to have to do something about that.
Yeah, you're going to have to do something about that because one of these days it's not going to come back to you.
No, I know. It's
oh man,
I've already
but it
lost
did.
a few.
This time
did you guys all write up your experience with the TV yet? I know, Robert, you had some other things in the queue that you were working on, but did you write up your W7 mini review?
Yeah, I need to personally. I just need to get that.
You're the one that hasn't yet. Okay,
I'll have some time next week to get it done. I'm also just thinking too about I've only ran into one or two issues with the TV itself related to video processing and other things. So
I did too. Just a couple of things, and we're going to talk about that later. So let's not jump the gun quite yet.
No, not at all. And just granted, this was a sponsored event by LG Electronics, but I'll be perfectly frank in saying that they were fairly even-handed in terms of how the information was presented, and they pretty much just turned us loose with some of the very best test equipment available, if you didn't bring your own, to throw at their TVs and in a variety of scenarios. So, as staged as it all was, I found it to be awesome in terms of just having access to the panel. Being able to hang out with some of my peers too, which was awful fun, as Caleb mentioned, and a chance to get some early access to it, which was good.
Yeah. Plus the fact they had Tyler Pruitt from SpectraCal there to help us with any sort of calibration issues, and he works for SpectraCal. He doesn't work for LG, so I found that to be very useful as well.
As well as a couple of LG engineers on hand if you really want to go deep diving into aspects of the panel itself. So
Yep. Exactly right. So let's start with, well, first of all, let me show a photo of the W7. This is the 2017 flagship called the Wallpaper TV. We have a photo called Screen, which should show us, Caleb took this one, and it appeared in his piece on digital trends, which I do recommend. That's Caleb. You did a great job. I'm really glad you got that laptop back.
Yeah, so am I. Thanks. I would say one of the downsides of doing this type of review, where they kind of corral you into a room where they've set up the TV ahead of time, is that it's not great for shooting video or photos, which is kind of a big part of what Digital Trends likes to do. We like to have a nice, beautiful gallery of photos and a little bit of video analysis as well. Really hard to do it in a room like that. But we made off with a few decent shots. And then fortunately, we got a chance to see it at CES as well. So we were able to fold in some photos there. But what's interesting about this shot was, it was dark. I had to go with a fairly long exposure. Snap this shot live and in real time. That's not a paused image. That would be something from Chef's Table on Netflix in Dolby Vision.
Which we got a chance to look at along with a bunch of other stuff. But let's start with some of the improvements. Well, we started the day with a fairly extensive briefing on what LG had done to improve the 2017 OLED TVs compared to the 2016s, which were already. I found this very, very strange that LG last year called their TVs perfect black, perfect color, perfect viewing angle. And yet this year they made some improvements. So, and they called this year's perfect too. So I thought, wait a second. Doesn't perfect mean can't be improved? Wait a second.
Well, you know, that's funny. I think that this is often the case, you know, with any large scale manufacturer. I've noticed is that the marketing arm of the company is somewhat, you know, disconnected from the engineering arm of the company and the development arm of the company. And
often true, yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to sell your TV, you're gonna hype it up a little bit, you know. And I think that's something that we do as reviewers for folks is kind of sift that stuff out and get to the meat of the TV. And in fact, there were some improvements made this year.
Yeah, there sure were. Robert, why don't you? What was the most important improvement to you?
Well, they're both related to panel performance. Number one being, I would say, coming out of black. The representation of the darkest grays and the TV's default gamma setup is much better. They were purposely hiding last year some of the dark gray detail because there were issues in that part of the picture. And this year is much more representative of a high-end display in terms of that ability to reveal that detail in the darkest scenes without elevating the black of the background or something that should be pure black. So that was the number one thing that probably jumped off to me. That and the physical panel color, that to me is as important as anything, because if anybody
what do you mean by that exactly?
When you look at any of the 2015 or any of the previous generation of LG's panels, if you look at them in a well-lit room with, say, a letterbox movie with black bars, those black bars have a reddish tinge to them due to the color of the panel. And it's kind of annoying. There is nothing you can do about that in a room with ambient light. And this year, and they were highlighting this left and right too, but there is literally no difference between real effective black in a well-lit room and the color of the panel. There is no odd suddenly, wow, there's like a reddish piece of film on the front of this display. For what purpose? This time around, not only good dark detail, more appropriate for what a modern TV should be able to do, but that physical panel characteristic will look better in more rooms, especially well-lit rooms.
Chris, I think they called that the neutral something polarizer film or something like that, something to make the blacks better in a well-lit room. Did you see that?
Yeah, they picked it up at Pep Boys. It's called window tint. Or maybe not exactly window tint, but that's the effect. It basically, I think it's absorbing some of the ambient light. They did mention that it's a lot better at rejecting ambient light. And yeah, like Robert said, it was a lot more neutral background palette, you know, from which all the other super colorful images emerged. But what I noticed was related to that, and it was really the shadow detail. Specifically, you know, one of their competitors used to like to put on a scene from the last Harry Potter movie where the wizards are all attacking Hogwarts, and on some earlier generation televisions, most of that detail was lost. You know, it just looked like a big black or dark gray, you know, mush. And on this TV, that scene looked great. You could pick out individual heads, you know, standing out on the dark hillside, you know, behind it. And I think really well done there. I think they took, you know, they listened to what we said as reviewers, what customers told them, and they really worked on those last few elements I think they needed for, you know, for really outstanding picture quality. Yeah,
I have to agree with that. Caleb, you must have seen also, you heard as we all did, that they increased the brightness, the peak brightness of OLED, and changed how the peak brightness varies depending on how bright the overall picture is, called APL, or average picture level.
Right. I did appreciate the fact that they increased the overall brightness. I think they said it was on average by 25%. And that's where you get into the APL thing, where it kind of it changes depending on what's happening on the screen. Some of that also ties in with what Dolby Vision can do, which I know we'll probably get to a little bit later. I definitely appreciated that boost in brightness. I appreciated the finer brightness controls when you're trying to dial things in just where you want them. One notch on the brightness control results in less movement overall, but the range was maintained. So I appreciated that. And I also really appreciated the fact that they had a cinema and cinema home HDR preset. So you can get in there and make adjustments, but straight out of the box, I think this is the thing that really impressed me the most, was the straight out of box settings. And we know that, people who tend to buy super high-end TVs like this may have a professional calibrator come in and make some adjustments. But I think this kind of TV, and indeed the less expensive OLEDs that will offer the same picture performance, because it's same panel, same chipset, right? Yep. Those kind of folks, I think, are going to pull the TV out of the box and go with whatever one of the presets are. Some people never get off the standard mode, sadly. But in HDR, you've got a Cinema Home, which optimizes HDR for a room that's got some ambient light in it, and then you've got the standard cinema preset, which is great if you're watching in a dark room or if you have a dedicated movie theater space. And by default, this is my favorite part, by default, in those HDR modes anyway, the motion smoothing circuitry is turned off. So you don't have to go in and manually find it and turn it off. Unfortunately, it's still default on for the SDR cinema setting. So you're going to have to go in and turn that off for all your SDR content, which we all know is the vast majority of what people are watching. But yeah, I felt like, to echo the improvement in the gradients and the dark grays, very welcome. Overall brightness increase, and then the granular control that we get out of the TV as well. I really enjoyed this year.
Yeah, I agree. The brightness control, by the way, does set the black level of the TV. I mean, that's primarily what that control is for. And having finer granularity, it was very coarse last year. I agree. I remember that. As you stepped one to the, to 50 to 51 to 52, things changed dramatically. And here, not so much. So I agree. I found that really great. Speaking of HDR, high dynamic range, we've added, the LG has added, in addition to HDR10, the free open source HDR format, and Dolby Vision, which they had last year. Now, with a firmware update sometime this year, they're going to add HLG, hybrid log gamma, which is probably going to be used for broadcasting, and even Technicolor's HDR system. And I've always said that I look at these HDR formats sort of in the same way as Dolby Digital, DTS, all the different audio formats that you can now get in an AV receiver. Some people have said, we've got another format war on our hands. What's going on? But I say no. I think as long as the TV implements them, then whatever comes in, it'll be able to handle. Robert, what do you think about that?
Without a doubt. If the capability's there, it just should simply do it. Specifically, though, to the case of adding Technicolor support this year, they learned something from Technicolor that went in to approve the whole line of OLED TVs by partnering with them. I forget exactly what it was. It was related to HDR playback, and it was a certain way the signal was being processed. And Technicolor had a suggestion for the right way to do it, and it turned out to be applicable for a variety of different scenarios. So just one benefit of them even expanding this coverage and to be as open as possible about these formats. Another thing, too, they were also getting into the lookup tables used in these televisions in terms of determining how colors are displayed on the screen when they're being mixed. And it's 6 times more detailed in terms of that lookup table compared to last year. Specifically, when I looked at things like color sweeps, be it saturation or color checker analysis, those default presets were below just noticeable differences. And that was... I hope the shipping unit, granted, everything we looked at was supposedly final product, but I'm hoping when I go into somebody's home, I'm seeing similar performance carried on through there as well. But even that said, there was still a little improvement to be made with the available calibration controls, and they worked very well for both SDR and HDR now, including a new 2-point setup that was unavailable last year for optimizing HDR performance, the white balance in particular. So
Yep. I noticed that too, and we're going to get into that a little later. I actually have my screenshots from my Cowman, what I did in the calibration to show that. But before we do that, I want to talk about the other sort of major thing that we haven't really talked about yet, which is Dolby Atmos, which is this immersive sound format that puts sounds overhead as well as around you. It's what's called an object-based format, so individual sound-emitting objects like planes or rockets or birds or whatever, as they move around, the sound tracks and appears in whatever speakers are needed for it to appear to be overhead or to your right or whatever. And another really nice thing that I think happened in the 2017 LG OLEDs is the appearance of Dolby Atmos coming out of the TV from its internal apps and also being reflected or mirrored from HDMI signals coming in. The Dolby Atmos will come back out via HDMI ARC, or audio return channel. And I think this is pretty important because Vudu's the only streamer now sending Atmos, at least to the LG app, but Netflix is working on it. We should see others. And I think this is a pretty big step. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a huge step. It's not something we were able to verify and test because we didn't have any gear on hand that actually would accept the HDMI ARC output from the television. Right. So what we saw was, Dolby Atmos built into the soundbar with, virtualization of that immersive sound field. Yeah, I really think that the true Atmos experience is much better than that. So I'm really hoping that what they talked about having Dolby Digital Plus output via HDMI ARC, carrying that Dolby Atmos soundtrack not only from the built-in apps, as you said, like Vudu, but hopefully pass through from things like Blu-ray players that are connected via HDMI. Through to the ARC output. Yeah. Actually, right, because it is effectively a switch. Yeah. They said it would be. I've never seen it yet. They would be the first TV to do it. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope that it works. And if it doesn't, I'm going to give them hell.
Well, this is good. But then there's the sort of flip side of the coin, which is the sound bar that you have to use with the TV. And we have a picture of the sound bar I want to show everybody. Again, I think from Caleb at Digital Trends. There it is. And it's this big honking sound bar. And it's got these up-firing speakers. You can see them on either end. It's also got a couple of front-firing speakers and a couple of what LG calls subwoofers. But it's
I don't know about how honking that is, Scott. It's not huge. It's sitting on top of a base. The actual soundbar itself is only about 4 inches high. Maybe less, maybe 3.5.
Well, no, but it's like 50-some inches wide.
Right. True. It's almost as wide as the TV. Yep.
It's
super deep, and you can't wall mount it, and.
Yeah,
yes, there's
exactly.
A lot of hands.
Yep. Caleb, you were saying you can't wall mount it, and you have to use it. You can't use the TV without it.
Yeah, I feel for LG a little bit here. As I mentioned in my written review for Digital Trends, they had a hard call to make. This is a revolutionary product. They had to make a kind of a big decision. Are we going to put all of the guts, the power supply, the switching, the input jacks, all that good stuff in a black box that would, all the processing, everything that you would normally put in the TV, which creates the big bump out that you see on all the other OLEDs that we've seen up until now. If you're going to have to pull them out of the display itself, you got to put them somewhere. And yes, they could have put them in a black box, something like the cable box or Blu-ray player that you stick in your entertainment system. But then there would be no audio, right? Now, yes, I think we've all made the argument that most folks investing this much money, $8,000 on a 65-inch wallpaper OLED, are probably going to have a pretty fancy sound system to go with it. But very well that they would have caught a lot of heat if they didn't put speakers, with this in some way. So I feel like first time out with a TV like this, they decided to stick it in a soundbar. It probably made the most sense to them. With that said, I'm a little bit, I'm disappointed that you have to have this big bulky thing and that you can't really get rid of it. And it's a good thing that they did enable Dolby Atmos pass through from HDMI, because there'd be no way to pass that onto your home theater system otherwise. It is the hub. It's what everything gets plugged into. I am also a little disappointed that it's not true Dolby Atmos. Those top firing drivers could have been configured to shoot up at an angle and be, producing discrete Atmos information.
Overhead channels in Atmos. Yeah, they don't do that.
Exactly. No, they don't. It's a virtual deal. But that decision may be tied to the fact that they had other kind of virtualization and processing that they wanted to fold in. I think they were worried about having there be kind of a disconnect between the panel and the sound source, which is funny because, a lot of people deal with that when they have a dedicated center channel speaker placed, 2-3 feet below their TV. So they had some tough choices to make. I think that, they've heard enough at this point from all the comments that they're seeing online that, yes, they should probably offer a version with a black box. And I honestly would be shocked if we didn't see that next year. Yeah.
By the way, the soundbar connects to the TV with this flat ribbon cable. You can see it in that picture with the white. And we have a picture called Connector, I think, which will show the actual connector. There it is. Multi-pin connector with a flat ribbon cable. And then I also wanted to just show everybody the connections on the back of the soundbar, which are all the inputs, and the Ethernet is there. Caleb, you took this picture as well, just to show that that's where it all is. I myself would strongly urge LG to make the small box as an option. I mean, you could just say buy it with the soundbar or buy it with the box. You get your choice. The fact that you don't have a choice is what kind of bugs me. Well, anyway, yeah, let's go to a couple of chat room questions here. Barfel has said, and Caleb, I think you just mentioned it. Speaking of expensive, I have to ask, the 65W7 is $8,000 list, and that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But I have to remind you that last year's flagship, the G6, the 65-incher, was also $8,000. So for no more money than the flagship started at last year, it's not, the G6 is now less, but for no more money than where the G6 started last year, the W7 is this wallpaper thin TV with all these improvements that we've been talking about. So I think that's pretty good news.
Well, and if I could add to that, Scott, I mean, let's look back historically at where OLED started. The first 65-inch OLED was what? Was it 15?
Yeah, $15,000.
Yeah,
$15,000 for a 55-incher.
Yeah, not quite. For a 55, exactly. So we're not quite. We're looking at a 65 for not quite half the price. That's movement in the right direction. And we don't know what the B7 is going to cost yet. We hope that we're going to see and hear about that in April. But I think, they're making OLED a more reasonable choice in the high-end TV sphere. And if you look at some of the competition's flagship TVs, 65-incher is going to cost you, about the same amount of money or more.
Exactly right. Let's see. SoCal Ray Jr. is asking, are they going to give you LUT control? Robert, you mentioned the 3D LUT lookup table, which gives you a more accurate depiction and representation of colors. Last year it was 9 by 9 by 9. This year it's 17 by 17 by 17. So it's got a lot more value. But I believe the answer is no. They're not going to give you LUT control. I think somebody asked that while we were there. Was it you, Robert?
I may have been. That was definitely a question I had. Will you be able to do any like DDC control, direct display control over the system even? And I don't recall them mentioning anything about that yet, although it is something they're definitely looking at in terms of as these TVs become more complex, it's nice to have the software you're using to adjust them actually be aware and have control over the TV's own controls. So two things. One, you don't have to bring up a menu on the screen, hopefully. And then the other is that you just have a more automated process to help you grind through some of the dirty work in terms of getting these things on target. Right. I will say Spectracal, and working with our good friends there, they're coming up with a way to better quantify what makes a good HDR TV. And there were a couple observations this year that really kind of surprised the hell out of me. One, this whole, at least how I was taught about HDR, is that if the content is, say, authored to 1,000 nits and the TV has 500 nits of light output capability, it should simply crush all the detail or clip all the detail above 500 nits in its presentation of it. That is simply not the case anymore. We have these LG OLEDs where, when displaying up to a 10,000 nit test pattern, we're displaying detail through the 4, 5, 6,000 range. Yeah, that technically shouldn't be there, but would you rather see more of the picture, even if it's not luminance accurate, or at least their interpretation of it? And I felt, yeah, probably in the end. So
I totally agree. In fact, I remember that test pattern. I wrote about it as well. On the 2016 model, and this was another thing they had there that I wanted to touch on for a moment. They had a 2016 E6 next to a 2017 E7, so they were the same model line, just 1 year later. And those were both 65 inches, next to a 30-inch Sony X300 OLED professional monitor. And so we were looking at these three things, and they were all being fed the same signal. And to your point, Robert, they were showing a 10,000 nit test pattern. And on the 2016 E6, you could see detail up to 5,000 nits because of the tone mapping of the TV. On the 2017 model, you could see up to 7,000 nits. So they've improved the tone mapping pretty significantly, I think. Chris, what was your impression of that side by side that they showed us?
Yeah, I think I agree with Robert. If you've got a TV that can't quite reproduce, the full, if they're mastering, say, up to 4,000 or even up to 10,000, what would you rather see? Clipping and just pure white, or a graduated amount of detail that's scaled based on the capabilities of the display? And I think that's the right way to go. It's a good way of illuminating detail and really bright spots. And I think it's a closer representation of what's intended. I don't think you want to do a hard clip. It's my opinion. I mean, I think it's probably subject to some discussion. Maybe there'll be debates about it, but I think they're making the right choice.
I happen to agree. Caleb, what about you?
Well, you're not going to get any debate in this particular podcast because I 100% agree. Clipping equals bad, okay? And I think that it does indeed give a little bit more of the intent, of the creator of the material that you're looking at. I also think it's really important, considering that the OLED television is the only one that can, produce these really excellent black levels with, screen uniformity, top to bottom, side to side. That scaling is really important. I want to get the maximum contrast based off that ultra deep black, right to as high as the TV can go in terms of its peak luminance. And I feel like the tone mapping job that they're doing right now does a great job of that. I think that's also, I got to say, that kind of spoke to me that they pulled out that Sony X300 and had it right there. And they were not bashful whatsoever about saying, listen, we use this as our guide. And we tried to make it as close to the performance capabilities of this particular monitor as we could. And yeah, I appreciated the fact that they put that much work into it, and I think it did a really tremendous job.
Yeah, I agree. And the OLED monitor, the Sony OLED monitor, is used often to master content in the studios. So I think it's a very good thing to do. The other thing I noticed about in that side-by-side right away was the fact that the 2016 E6 had a slight bit of a greenish cast to it. Robert, you were talking about the reddish color of black in a well-lit room. Well, here we were in a somewhat well-lit room, and this was another complaint that I heard all the time about the 2016 models, was that they had a slight greenish cast, especially off-axis. And I didn't see that. I saw that on the 2016. I did not see that on the 2017. Did you notice that?
I did indeed. And it's indicative of every 2016 OLED I've looked at this year. They come out of the box with the grayscale, usually in the brightest part, a little green. And we saw that on Leo's B6. And that default out of the box performance is not only more on target and less green heavy. The other nice aspect of it was that it's simply on target more, and having that extra dark detail. The darkest scenes were the most impressive in that side-by-side demonstration. You realized how much it was crushing certain details, but also in terms of off-axis viewing, everyone thinks OLEDs are perfect, and they're not. Especially when you look at grayscale. You will notice if you stand off to the side on the 2016 models, one edge will be greenish and one edge is going to be reddish, and it'll switch as you move around the room. I saw a lot less of this on the 2017 TV, so I'm hoping that's a combination probably of the new filtering, the new panel tech, and all of it put together. But it really just gave that impression of this is really the first year where I'm seeing world-class OLED finally. Not the hyper polished versions of LG's panels from third-party manufacturers, but now actually stuff coming right off the factory line.
Well, we got a lot more to talk about, but before we do, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this episode, which is Grasshopper. Now, Grasshopper is a virtual phone system designed for entrepreneurs. Grasshopper works just like a traditional phone system, but it requires no hardware purchase or software installation. With their iOS and Android app, callers can reach you wherever you are on your mobile phone. Grasshopper allows you to keep your existing number so you can maintain your brand. When you make a call, your client will see your Grasshopper caller ID instead of your personal phone number. Simply select a toll-free or local number, record a custom greeting, and add multiple extensions for your business. Toll-free numbers are a great thing for marketing, and they make your business sound much more professional. You can set up department and employee extensions with custom call forwarding to any phone in the world. And you can get voicemails emailed to you as audio attachments. You can also send and receive SMS text messages from your business number. Join over 250,000 Grasshopper customers today. Plans start at just $12 a month, and you have a 30-day money-back guarantee. So turn your smartphone into a business line with Grasshopper. To save $50 on your order, go to trygrasshopper.com/twit. That's trygrasshopper.com/twit. And we thank Grasshopper very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. Robert, you mentioned something about automating some of the dirty work of getting a TV to look its best. And I just wanted to quickly point out something that LG and SpectraCal, who makes the CalMan software we all use, something they're doing that wasn't quite ready for our visit, but I'm really excited about it. And that is going away from the golden reference idea. Tell us what you know of that.
Starting with the launch of Dolby Vision. In particular, I'm thinking of the reference series from Vizio. In order to work on one of those TVs, you had to have this you had to have this value that was specific to that TV that would then enable you to then target the calibration to that. And it was literally up to the manufacturers to provide that, to figure out what that value should be and get it to you. And you just knew from day one this wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to be kept up with in order to make it really useful. So that's out the window. By the
way, that manufacturer supplied file with the sort of target of what you want the TV to do in Dolby Vision is called the golden reference.
And compare that to how we work on TVs previously, and it's essentially measure the color of gray and make adjustments, or measure the performance characteristics of the TV and adjust it accordingly. And it's getting back to that.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the highlights of this trip was talking to the SpectraCal folks about how we can better describe performance across different display technologies in HDR presentations. And the one thing they are working on, and hopefully I'm not revealing anything I shouldn't be, but they're talking about now that term, just noticeable differences. And it will be now how many just noticeable differences, physically perceivable differences in terms of step detail will a particular TV offer. And And that, I think, is a far more useful thing. That kind of goes back to what I was saying about, I'm showing a 10,000 nit pattern on a TV with 1,000 nits. Well, how many specific steps does it have? If a TV with, say, the ability to show you 500 unique steps within an HDR signal versus a TV that can do 2 or 3 times that, you'll get a more seamless or a more realistic presentation out of that TV. And I think that's more valuable than simply getting into things like now color volume and luminance racing and, all of it. I think it's being able to say, you know what, for the average human being, this TV will provide more visible information to your eyes than TVZ or TVX or whatever. Mm-hmm. So,
although they're also talking about, as you said, just noticeable difference, which is to the human eye, how much, if the difference is this much, can you see it? Can you detect it? And if the answer is no, well, make the difference a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. Oh, there now I'm just starting to see a difference. That's the just noticeable difference. So if something is underneath that difference value, you're not going to see any difference. So why even try to replicate it? Because no one's going to see it.
Totally. And LG kind of got into bashing the whole concept of, not bashing overall, but in terms of trying to weaken the argument for focusing on color volume. And I thought that was a little interesting, really. They kept saying, like, to what standard or to how are you comparing color volume? And it's like, well, the z-axis is luminance. Isn't that what you're going to compare? But they don't want to get into that comparison. So I understand the desire to come up with a metric that's factors it all together in a sense in terms of what you're capable of seeing. So for that, I'm really looking forward to seeing some of the next launches of the Calman software or how they can incorporate these just noticeable differences into our reporting. This kind of goes right back to where HDRL came from in terms of the curves they looked at and seeing if detail needed to be above or below a certain level before the errors became noticeable. And it all just seems like, this is the path we should be on. It seems to tie into the current tech nicely, and it will give us a value that's more directly comparable across such a variety of display tech we have now.
Oh, yeah. And the fact that displays can have different capabilities. This display can do 500, or in the case of the 2017 OLEDs, I measured actually with a 5% window, 727 nits. Or another TV can do 1200. Another TV in the future might be able to do 2. So we no longer have a standard to which all TVs should conform because they have their own capabilities. So measuring those capabilities, which is what this new approach by SpectraCal and LG is going to incorporate, measure this TV itself. What are its capabilities? Okay, now let's make it work so that the content coming in is displayed as best it can.
I think this will go back in terms of helping manufacturers who don't make necessarily the highest performing TVs out there focus on making sure they aren't doing things like hard clipping above a certain level with HDR presentation, specifically for some of the HDR light TVs I see in terms of they accept that signal, but they don't have the luminance or color capability to actually represent it properly.
Right.
They could be doing, there are a lot of TVs out there like that, and a lot of them can look really bad with some HDR content. So if they can do a little firmware magic and smooth that out a little bit better, that'll help everyone.
And Scott, I had a comment / question.
Yes,
and I
please.
think it's what you're talking about. But they were talking about, instead of the golden reference, that there was a way we'd be able to get the panel into a native panel mode.
Yes,
and then
exactly.
Generate these test patterns, measure it on calibration gear, and then send these numbers, basically plug them in to the TV. So was that specifically for Dolby Vision mapping, tone mapping?
Yep.
Okay.
Specifically for Dolby Vision. And this year, what it's going to require is you're going to take a meter, you're going to measure all the stuff. You're then going to download that file from SpectraCal to a thumb drive and then plug it into the TV. Right. So that's this year. Next year, apparently, hopefully, they'll get it so that there's some direct communication between the software and the TV. But at the moment, it's being done by SneakerNet. So that's all right. That's all right. Mike Heiss, by the way, thanks, Chris, for bringing that up. That's a very good point. Mike Heiss is asking in the chat room, what did they use as a playback source, particularly for Dolby Vision? Caleb, you mentioned that you looked at some Dolby Vision during our evaluation time.
That I did. I looked at a lot of it, actually. And because you can't get Dolby Vision off of Ultra HD Blu-ray just yet, that is on the way.
Yep.
I used almost exclusively Netflix because that was what was available. If you have the $14.99 a month tier, which allows up to 4 simultaneous streams and 4K Ultra HD, along with either HDR10 or Dolby Vision, depending on what your TV supports and what the app in the TV supports. Or
two
the
different
app
things.
in your streamer supports.
Yes.
A lot of different pieces to this right now, which hopefully we'll see smoothed out in the future. But the Netflix app in the 7 Series OLEDs this year, of course, supports both HDR10 and Dolby Vision. Dolby Vision is going to be what you get if you click on a title that supports it. I looked at, like I said before, Chef's Table, Marco Polo, a few other Netflix originals that were captured and processed. I mean, end to end, it was Dolby Vision, and I'm impressed. I'm a fan of Dolby Vision. I can tell you that I think it looks very good. It looks significantly better than the SDR version of the same, just in 4K resolution. But what I'm really looking forward to is getting a couple of TVs with very similar performance, one doing HDR10, the other doing Dolby Vision, and making a comparison there to see how much of that Dolby Vision magic is actually delivering for us. Because one of the aspects that they talk about a lot is that it does a frame-by-frame analysis, and so it's not just giving you a peak luminance level and that stays the same throughout the entire movie. It's dynamic. It kind of changes along with the content and optimizes it to look great on your display. And it also knows a little bit about what the display's capabilities are, so it optimizes the content for the specific TV that you're watching it on. I'd say
by the way, this is called Dolby Vision system is called dynamic metadata. The HDR10 system is called static metadata, which means,
correct.
as you said, there's only one value for peak brightness at which it was mastered, and one value for the median or average picture level of the entire movie. That's
However,
static.
Direct comparisons are going to become more and more difficult, especially with new technology in the 2017 LG OLEDs. They're using something called dynamic data insertion now, where they're doing scene-by-scene analysis of HDR10 and providing a more Dolby Vision style look to that content.
Yes. I think, which is a good thing. I think that's a good thing. I applaud that. It's a feature that we didn't talk about before. They're actually adding dynamic metadata to HDR10 and HLG, this broadcast standard, when it's going into their set. So I think, Caleb, if I were you, and I would love to see this myself, to put up an LG OLED, say, that can do Dolby Vision, and another TV that doesn't do Dolby Vision, so that it's forced to do normal, regular, static HDR10, that would be a very interesting side-by-side. I look forward to reading. There.
Then you're comparing more the TV technology, I think, at that point, because an LCD with HDR10 and an OLED with Dolby Vision, it's apples and oranges. So I think if you could get two identical TVs and you could get a source, I don't know how we'd do it, because most of the content is only one or the other. I think it's the streaming services that would give us the option to do both.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm hoping there is a way to do it. But I think this goes back to something that you said earlier, Scott. The whole Dolby Vision, HDR10, Technicolor, HDR game is very similar, I think, to Dolby Digital, DTS, RO3D for receivers, in that whoever supports the most is probably going to walk away looking a little bit better. I mean, there are some people who are very firmly right now, they're not buying into the Dolby Vision thing. They're not licensing it. They're not putting it in their TVs or their Ultra HD Blu-ray players. I don't know how much longer that's going to be an option. What do you guys think about that?
Well, some people, we did see more Dolby Vision capable, or at least updatable, Ultra HD Blu-ray players. The LG had theirs, the UP970, which Mike Heist asked if it was at our event. It was not. The Oppo UDP203, which was at the event, we used that primarily. I used that primarily as my source device. And that one will support Dolby Vision. I think at least 3 studios have promised Dolby Vision titles on disc this year.
And I think Philips has a player that is going to have Dolby Vision as well. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly right. So we are going to see more Dolby Vision this year. Last year, it seemed like it was kind of, so where is it? It's in the commercial cinema. It's in Dolby Cinema, but hardly anywhere else. Now I think it's coming along pretty nicely. Chris, tell us a little bit about, you and Robert were working together. Did you use mostly the Ultra HD Blu-ray player, or were you looking more at streaming when you were looking at content?
Yeah, I had a couple of USB drives with Dolby Vision content on it. One that I think LG or Dolby had given us last year, and then LG had a brand new one with some content that we weren't allowed to tape record or take photos of because of content issues, maybe not licensed from the studio for public performance. But there was a couple of the new Dolby Vision trailers on that had some really, really nice examples of, pure blacks, deep colors, rich detail. And they had, some of the new trailers had sort of a window that was HDR 4K, and then outside the window was SDR. So you could take a look at one image and then get a really good sense of what it looks like with the additional detail and the HDR capabilities of Dolby Vision compared to, it may have been 1080p outside the window. I'm not positive, but it definitely was SDR. And that really kind of gave you a really good example of what it looks like. I think those were probably developed for retail by Dolby to really highlight the capabilities of Dolby Vision. But when we were looking at standard 4K HDR content that was not Dolby Vision, then we were using a Blu-ray player that had. I think
we can say we don't need to be.
Yeah, okay. It was a Samsung.
It was a Samsung. You guys had a Samsung. I had an Oppo.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there were 2 Oppos, one Samsung. Sorry. We got lucky with the Samsung.
Interesting. Obviously, LG would have put its own UHD Blu-ray players in our little cubicles had they been ready. So obviously they weren't yet. So, and kudos to LG for saying, you know what, we're not ready yet. You need a player. We're going to put these players in there. That's it. So
right, and they also did have the Vudu app on the TV, and Vudu also. In fact, Vudu was the first out with Dolby Vision support. I think they've got 20 or 30 titles. It may be higher. Nick Iverson, that is, having repped Dolby and now LG, you should know the number of titles that are available in Dolby Vision, if anyone does. So you feel free to type that into the chat if you like.
Yeah, really.
There are quite a few titles, and I've always hated the idea they can only get Dolby Vision on streaming, because of bandwidth issues and buffering and everything else. But one of the cool things that they do on Dolby Vision when it's streaming is that they will step down the resolution before they step down the HDR. So if you have a buffering issue, it'll drop down to 1080p or even 720p before it loses the metadata for the HDR content. So you'll still get the brighter color spectrum before you lose that. You'll lose resolution before color. And I think honestly that's the right call. That's the right decision to make.
I totally agree. Me too. Well, let me just show, we don't have a lot of time left, but a little bit. I wanted to show my results of the calibration. And Robert, Caleb, I think you did not do a calibration. Is that correct?
I did not do a calibration, no. First of all, you guys are doing plenty of that. I just have to look over your shoulder. No, Digital Trends has always been, very average consumer-focused website. We don't take a ton of measurements. I spent my time digging into using WebOS, checking how fast that was to bounce between different apps. A lot of usability type stuff. And, of course, just watched a ton of content on the television. I did throw up some test patterns and made some adjustments and what have you. But I did not get down and dirty with the measurement equipment because, frankly, there's lots of people out there doing that, providing that very valuable information. And I just kind of wanted to dig into some different things with the time we had. It's tough when you're limited like 3, maybe 4 hours. And so, I'm really excited to see what you came out with.
Well, let's take a look. Let's start with SDR pre-cal. I started with a standard dynamic range calibration, and Robert, I'd love to hear whether you got similar results. So here's SDR pre-cal, and let me look at the screen itself. It's not bad. It's really not bad. This is out of the box
very evenly. Yeah,
and you know the errors are
cast.
Slightly reddish cast. Did you get the same result?
I want to say I did, actually. I was looking at, what are those numbers related to? You do that method, and I always just have it like 0 to 100 or whatever. But is that a 0 to 100 style graph I'm looking at?
Which one?
That one that goes 70, 80, 90, 100. I mean, just the RGB balance I'm looking at right now. So.
Oh, RGB balance, yeah. I can't see the end of the. I can't see the end.
It doesn't really matter, but just to know that that is a really good out of the box result in terms of.
It really is. In particular, if you look at the other end, Kara, there you go. There you go.
That's better.
You can see the individual color mixing, or at least the 100% primaries at the bottom there in terms of their color error. The average color error of the grayscale right next to that on the left.
Which was 2 or less, yeah.
Yeah, that's superb. That's below just noticeable differences in moving video. So
exactly.
Out of the box, this TV was exceptional, and it tuned up just fine.
It did.
It goes to reference quality pretty quick.
It does. In fact, if we go to post cal, we'll see the SDR post cal. Look at that.
Look at that.
Below 1. That's like 0.5 error on the grayscale. That's flat and lovely. If you're trying to improve that, go home. Stop the madness.
Now I will say,
I got a quick question. Did you ever measure anything close to 1,000 nits on that TV?
No, not close to 1,000, but I did.
I didn't hit 800.
Really? I guess I didn't either. I did take a series of brightness measurements at different window sizes. And I started at 5%, so that's a black screen with just 5% of the image in a square in the middle at peak white, and I got 727 nits, which is better than the 540. And this was in cinema mode after calibration.
True.
We actually got a little bit higher than that on the 10% window, oddly enough. Robert, what was the number? Was it 750?
It was almost 750. It was like 750.
Yeah, almost 750.
Wow. But we didn't actually measure a 3% window, did we?
I took it down to 2%, and it was about the same. So I was just like,
interesting,
okay, 2, 5, and 10.
Because LG does say at a 3% window that you should be able to see up to 1,000 nits. But okay.
And
maybe that's in
just
vivid
for a
mode.
fraction of a second.
That's in vivid mode, yeah.
No, they said in HDR mode. They said in HDR or vivid mode.
Oh, okay. Well, we have to say that HDR mode cranks the backlight control. OLED doesn't really have a backlight. It's called OLED light, but it functions the same way. That cranks it up to max. So that's what's going on there.
Otherwise, I had very few errors or anything noted in signal processing. One oddity I ran across, and I'd love to retest this again, and I'm sure it's just software, but if you put up a static sharpness pattern in 1080 input, 1080 IRP, the single pixel lines, the black lines in the horizontal only, had undefeatable ringing around them, and we were never able to get rid of it. But again, I've seen worse in a TV in terms of something that's software fixable. So that should be pretty simple. I would have liked to have spent more time on it, but as people can probably guess, we were pretty limited. And I'm like, I just take a picture of that and run, keep going.
And interestingly, it didn't actually appear on the 4K test pattern.
Yeah,
it
was very unnoticeable if it was there at all. I felt there was no similar error in any way, shape, or form on the 4K pattern we looked at, but it was just with 1080i line input, and that may affect your SDR viewing. So it may be, you may notice a little extra sharpness and enhancement to your picture that you have no control over. But again,
I didn't actually look at I didn't actually look at a 1080p sharpness pattern, but I'll take your word for it. Absolutely.
Another thing I think is worth pointing out.
And honestly,
I'm sorry. Hang on a second. Caleb first.
Sure.
Sorry, Chris. I didn't mean to stomp on you there. No, we get a lot of gamers asking about whether this is a TV that they could actually use. So always going towards the input lag. And I believe that it came out at 21.5 milliseconds, something like that, which more than a 50% improvement over last year.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that in the improvements. But that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Came out to 21.5, and last year's we're in the 33, 34 millisecond range. So significant improvement for gamers, which I'm not. Chris, you were about to say something.
The only thing I want to say is that people have to keep in mind that we're looking for things to criticize.
Yes.
And I felt like we had to go out of our way to really find things. Well, let's mention the ringing. Yeah, there was something. Let's mention it didn't get 1,000. It was a gorgeous picture. I mean, I'm not paid to say that. I just think that it's really remarkable how far the technology has come in just a few years, and there's virtually no competition for them. Yes, there's competition in the TV business. There's no OLED competition. There's going to be OLED TVs that are coming out that are LG panels. Hello, they're made by LG Display. Nobody else is making OLEDs in this size. So the fact that they keep making them better, even though they don't really have to, it's great. It's like I think that's part of the reason, though, that the price is not coming down as quickly is that, again, there is no competition. So it would be great if somebody else came out.
Yeah, I think the manufacturing process is still more expensive than it is for LCD, which is another reason why they're coming out more expensive.
Good point.
Yeah, let me just quickly show HDR pre-cal and post-cal just to show you guys what I found in HDR. And I only used the 2-point calibration. Robert, did you get into the 20-point? I don't like what they're... Hell no.
You hand me $1,000 minimum before I go in there. That's a lot of work, man.
That is a lot of work, especially. And here's the other thing that I really found a bugaboo for me personally, being a geek. The way the 20-point calibration works is you have to pick which level you want to adjust, red, green, and blue. And the levels are identified by these weird code values that kind of don't mean anything. I'm sure they mean something, but I don't know what they mean. So I said to LG folks, please replace those with, percentage of peak luminance or something easy to understand, and then we'll be able to do it. But I did use the 2-point, and here this is pre-calibration, and notice the entire top half of the brightness range has errors that are definitely noticeable. And then if we go to post-cal,
well, you got to be careful with the DE errors in luminance, because a lot of it's luminance factored. A lot of that, a change in luminance will dramatically affect the DE error. So it's more important, I feel, to pay attention to how the lines actually track up above in the RGB balance when looking at that.
All right. Well, let's go back and forth, Kara, again between pre-cal and post-cal. Here's pre-cal. There's post-cal. So it's not as good. I would have needed to gone into 20-point to really get that correct.
Because that hump is the roll-off that you're looking at there that you see in the EOTF on the right. So there's some funkiness afoot when you make that bend. And to say that, I'm more concerned is the color of gray consistent than I am is the absolute luminance where it should be. But just looking at your EOTF result, that's pretty damn good. And you were using, I believe, the CS2000, which is like a $30,000 meter.
Yes, I was just because I could, because I had it there, and it was so much fun to say, I use this thing. Yeah, man, that's great. So anyway, that was
But the
just
fact that there is a 2-point control, and looking at this result, it appears to be quite effective, especially in the brighter grays, and it's definitely worth using now, and it's usable. So
yeah, exactly. Let's see. Did any of you? I looked a bit at the thing called HDR effect, which takes SDR content and makes it HDR by expanding the dynamic range. Did any of you take a look at that much? Robert, how about you?
Not really, because as soon as we were done with the setup, we pretty much dove into the test samples available on USB and Blu-ray. More Blu-ray, I think we looked at than anything else. Be it
we watched about 15 minutes of Deadpool. That was fun.
You get caught up.
It's such on that TV. I'm telling you,
such a positive story. Anyway,
exactly.
However, that HDR effect kind of goes back into their advanced scene by scene analysis now, to where they're doing a much better job of HDR conversion, or improving HDR10 into more of a dynamic metadata style system. But that directly applies back to the SDR to HDR conversion as well. So
yeah. Caleb, did you look at much SDR content?
Not enough to say anything valuable about it. I will say that I was not a fan of it last year. The 2016 TVs, I don't use it. Your Blu-rays look better without it. I am hoping they said that they made some improvements there. I turned it on and off once when I was watching a 1080p Blu-ray. I just didn't get enough time to say anything really valuable. Can't tell you if it's improved or not. But I hope to, when we get a hold of some of the lower series OLEDs and get them in the lab, and I can spend days and days and days with them, hope to be able to say something about that.
Wouldn't that be awesome? I'm looking forward to that myself. I did spend a little time. I took the Blu-ray disc of Baraka. You guys know that disc, right? It's a really beautiful disc. And I turned HDR effect on and off. It's actually a picture mode, so I had to choose the cinema picture mode or the HDR effect picture mode. And it did, expand the dynamic range, gave it a lot more pop, I thought. Interestingly, though, there was one scene of a star field at night. And with HDR effect on, there was a lot more noise in the signal, in the picture, than there was with it off. And I found that a little disturbing.
Was that the film grain noise, do you think, or was that?
I don't think so. I don't. It didn't look like film grain to me.
Okay,
it looked more like quantization noise.
That's definitely something to keep an eye out for as well. Mad Max, in particular, the 4K Blu-ray that I put on, when it's in HDR mode, it's doing HDR10. I feel like that film grain, that faux film grain that we're seeing directors add into content, it looks like something is wrong, because it's so obvious. You see it in any large swath of a single color. Not talking about banding, but that creepy crawly noise that you see it's a lot more obvious than it's been in the past for me.
I didn't happen to notice that. I did put on a little bit of Mad Max Fury Road, but I guess I didn't notice that. But I'll take your word for it, absolutely.
Well, my face was like, this close to the TV. I was definitely getting up in there and getting up close and personal. But it's something I'm especially sensitive to. I've noticed that it's coming from different directors on some of these newer films. And I think I just worry that people are going to see that and go, what's wrong with my TV? When in fact, it's probably the content that's doing that.
Yeah. Robert, did you or Chris, did you see anything that indicated something along those lines?
I happened to be next to Caleb when he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, take a look at this." And I was like, "Yeah, that is not the best handling of that noise I've seen." And I go back to very easy on the eye displays like plasma systems that I still have one, and occasionally I really do appreciate sometimes how that treats the older content a little bit more than some of the newer TVs. And in particular, when you have like film transfers like Baraka that were shot in 60, 70 millimeter and then moved over to digital production. I think it was digitized at 8K originally from film. The Photochem Bigfoot printer or Bigfoot scanner, excuse me. If that still exists.
Yeah, I don't know. They must somewhere. Somebody must still have one.
Excuse me. But that would be an ideal title, though, to take a look at that function on the TV, as far as can that SDR to HDR conversion occur without it just looking like the old school vivid mode we're also used to, yet still get a great picture out of it with the additional brightness of HDR. Can all your content be converted effectively to where you can just leave that function on all the time now?
Right. Well, that'll take some more research and investigation and some more time. Hopefully, all of us will get one of these or another of these sets in to review and spend, as Caleb says, days and days looking at. Because I know for me, as I was flying home, I thought, oh, damn, I should have done this, and oh, I should have done that. But, we only had 4 hours or whatever it was. And as you said, as somebody reminded me, I went back after dinner and actually spent another hour in there. I probably shouldn't have, but I'm glad I did because I got more information. But I still didn't get enough, and I don't think any of us really did. But it was sure a lot of fun. Let's have any concluding remarks, Caleb. Let's start with you.
I think the thing I'm the most excited about is the fact that this picture quality will be available in every OLED that LG makes in 2017, if indeed they're using the exact same panel and exact same processing. You can get the same picture quality that we're raving up and down about in as low as the B7 and the C7 series. And really what you're getting as you move up the line is fancier audio systems and fancier design. So I'm excited that people are going to have access to this kind of picture quality, down in the $3,000 range. I think is what we're going to be looking at, as time goes by.
Right. By the way, the 55-inch C7 will list for $3,500. The 65 will be $5,000. The 55-inch E7 will be $4,500, and the 65-inch will be $6,000. And the 65-inch G7 will be $7,000, and the 65-inch W7 will be $8,000. So they are pretty expensive. They haven't announced the B7 pricing yet, but it'll be less. It'll be in the $3,000 range. I think you're exactly right. Chris, how about you? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it was very telling, in my opinion anyway, that the only thing they could compare the 2017 OLED to was a 2016 OLED. A lot of other manufacturers, they'll bring in the competitor, and they'll, I don't know what they'll do to set the competitor, but it always looks like, the Vizio, wow, that Samsung looks terrible. But at the Samsung event, man, that Vizio looks terrible. And, and here it was LG against LG. And against a professional monitor. So, they wanted to show you, the 2016 OLEDs got rave reviews. They're great picture quality. We thought we could make some improvements. And here, take a look at this. And we could see noticeable improvements. So that I thought was very telling. On the audio side, which is very near and dear to my heart, I'm very happy to see that they're treating Dolby Atmos as a priority, that they're promising to be able to pass that out, to an external, whether it's a soundbar or a receiver, to be able to do Dolby Atmos with the apps built into the TV, hopefully with pass-through from other devices as well. Can't wait to see that actually work. I think with the built-in soundbar, they've done something with it. It does sound more immersive. I was getting a feeling of immersiveness, but I wasn't fooled into thinking there were speakers above my head or behind me. So I think it was good sound. It didn't get very loud. It was one thing. I cranked it all the way to 100, and it seems like I still wouldn't be annoying the neighbors. But I think that, making sound a priority is important, and I'm happy to see them do that. But I think for an $8,000 TV, as others have said, give customers the option of getting it in a little black box that can easily fit in a rack somewhere, and then connect that out via HDMI ARC into a full-fledged Dolby Atmos surround sound system. That's my feeling. Picture quality, amazing. Sound quality, good. Give us some more options.
Very good. Robert?
I would say it's probably having 6 times more detail available in terms of the data points for mapping color to that screen. I found that across the board, its ability to do some of the color mixing for skin tones and other darker reddish orange shades seemed a lot better. And credit to LG for actually just highlighting, hey, with these specific adjustments, don't take them into the extremes. This is a TV where you will not have to make much adjustment to it to get it to reference quality. And for that, I really appreciate it. And pretty much every complaint I had about last year's model has been addressed in some way. Gaming performance is going to be better, much better. And hopefully that firmware gets pushed to last year's TVs sooner than later. Otherwise, I will say the W's design, it kind of puts a smile on my face. One of the first things I asked to do was go up and pull the corner off the magnetic mount to see that panel flex a little bit and to let it snap back on. That 65-inch screen weighs about 17 pounds or so. It's that kind of like, it's as close to the future as I probably would have guessed as a kid as I've seen so far, and that was pretty neat. And I really look forward to seeing the shipping units though that have a little more real world wear on them. So,
well, as all of us remember, I'm sure, the days of the 350-pound CRT are now long gone, and happy for it.
because I was reading an article recently about how console gamers, or not console gamers, but the old arcade cabinet gamers are in this tizzy about they won't be able to get CRTs anymore. Consider OLED. I think that would make an awesome arcade cabinet display, although
there you go.
Expensive. So
one last thing here.
We didn't get into it, but they changed the gamma setup on this TV too, and I think that's kind of nice, actually. I think it's a little bit better. It's going off into the weeds a little, but
but you're right. You're right. You're exactly right. One last thing. Web 6595 in the chat room is mentioning that there's no 3D in any of these TVs, and there was in the 2016 models. So just quickly, some people are just way up in arms about this. I personally don't care. I don't really watch 3D at home, and I really would much rather have these improvements we've been talking about to having 3D. I'm not concerned about it. Robert, are you? No, and if they could do it without reducing the overall light output of the TV, they would. You know, yeah. I don't. Yeah. That's really what it came down to. I guess that's true. You are still seeing the very best in terms of today's presentations in Dolby Cinema theaters, in terms of beyond DCI color and incredible contrast ratios and amazing sound. So we don't not have in 3D. No. Those are all 2D. In Dolby Vision, you can do 3D, but you can do it. But the Dolby Cinemas in the U.S. anyway are not doing 3D. I did not know that. That's just wrong. That's what I think it's right. Projectors are made for anyway. Oh no, man! I think it's right. I'd much rather see high dynamic range in a theater in 2D than using that spectrum separation 3D. That's a whole other topic we can't get into today. So as good as everything's looking for 2017, and it is clearly the best HDR, if you've waited until now, you did the right thing, I think. You're going to get a better product than pretty much anything from last year with more compatibility. But still, go check out Dolby Cinema theaters if you haven't already. And see your favorite content. I can't agree with that more. Chris, do you miss 3D? You know, I'm the one person that maybe does. I know the manufacturers kind of force fed it to the consumers, and I think that many consumers kind of reacted against that negatively. They're like, it's the next big thing, trust us. I still like putting on Gravity in 3D. I wish my Gravity Blu-ray had both 3D and Atmos. Can't do it unless I buy two players and get them synchronized somehow. But anyway, I actually do enjoy 3D at home. I'm sad to see it go. I still enjoy seeing 3D in theaters occasionally, in an IMAX theater or I guess maybe not in a Dolby Cinema theater, although I thought The Martian was in 3D. But no, you're probably right about that, Scott. There's only one exception, and that was Rogue One was shown in 3D in a handful of Dolby Cinemas. That's the only exception I know of. Wow. So I miss it a little bit, but I think the manufacturers are taking it out generally in response to consumer disinterest. There are many people that do still enjoy it, but I think it's getting to be a smaller percentage. Most of my friends don't bother with it. They don't like having the glasses on. They don't really appreciate it enough to worry about it. So I think it's going out with a whimper, although there are certainly there is still a fan base there that is very sorry to see it go. Yeah. Caleb, how about you?
I'm going to miss 3D the way I miss S-Video right now. What a cute little connector, with the pins that would bend on you and then
okay.
Like, I just, with due respect to the people who did enjoy 3D, I got nothing against you. I don't understand you, but I will say that I won't miss 3D, and Chris nailed it on the head. The fact is the manufacturers don't have much reason to include it. There's a smaller and smaller faction of people who are into the at-home 3D thing, I think it was time to go. That was used to be a differentiator back in the day when they're like stuck at 1080p and they're like, where are we gonna go? What's exciting about TV anymore? 3D, and then we had active shutter glasses and the polarized glasses, and we were recharging and buying those stupid watch style disc battery things. And, I'm sorry, good riddance. Goodbye, 3D. Okay. I never really loved you.
Okay. Well, listen, we're way past time here, but we've had a great conversation, wonderful information. I want to thank you all for being here. It was great to see you in person in San Francisco. And now 1 week later on the podcast, let's say, I want to say thanks to Chris Boylan, bigpicturebigsound.com. Thank you for being here.
All right. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Caleb Denison at digitaltrends.com. Thank you. Your first but not your last time on the show, I'm sure.
Certainly not, I hope. And thank you for having me. It's been a really good time.
Good, me too. And Robert Heron, my regular friend and guest on the show at heronfidelity.com. Thanks again for being here.
Absolute pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
You can always find me at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott and at avsforum. You can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv/htg and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twithometheatergeeks. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Paul Hales, a speaker designer and founder of Pro Audio Technology, to talk about immersive audio. So that should be really interesting, and I do hope you will join us. Until then, geek out.